Welcome to All the F Words,
a podcast where two writer friends, nearly 30 years apart, explore everything we give an F about. I'm Gabby Moskowitz.
And I'm Joanne Green. On each episode of All the F Words, we'll focus on a theme starting with the letter F. Things like fantasy, FM, fake news, and feet. Okay, maybe not feet.
We'll share stories from our lives and our distinct generational perspectives, and we'll look to the experts for insights and ideas.
Today we're going to talk about femininity, which, like so many words, means different things to different people. In fact, it can even mean different things to the same people at different points in their life.
Well, what does femininity mean to you, Joanne?
I have a lot to say on this subject, so I think we need to devote a whole episode to it.
So when I think about femininity, the first thought I have kind of goes back to when I was like in my early years of being a teenager, 12, 13, 14. And I started, but kind of around the time when my peers everyone started to kind of dress up a little bit and really play. It was like when we went from being kids in loose clothes who all kind of looked the same to boys and girls and the girls started putting a little more traditional effort into what we were wearing. I remember having this sense, and it's a really perhaps simplistic view of what femininity means now, certainly different from how I think about it now. But I remember having this sense that there were girls who seemed to understand how to be feminine, and then there was me. And there was some stuff that came naturally. You know, I was a pretty little girl. I had pretty long blonde hair and I was cute, but I really felt like I didn't inherently know what I was doing. But there were other girls who did. And once makeup became a thing, there were girls who knew what they were doing. And then there was me. It seemed to me almost like there was this blessing of girliness that was doled out to some girls. And even though I wanted to be feminine, and I certainly wouldn't have identified as like a tomboy, and I didn't identify as masculine, but I really didn't know what I was doing when it came to those early ideas of femininity. So that's
which may be a credit
thought.
To your mom. So my first reaction to that is this is a credit to your mom, who probably didn't inculcate you with these very specific notions of what femininity was. So
yeah,
yay, mom.
Yeah.
You know, for me, I think way back, I shared a bedroom with my sister who was 8 years older, and I don't think I had any say in the decor. And it was pink bouquets of flowers and pink silk bedspreads that we weren't allowed to sit on and a green shag rug. And I hated all the pink. I just hated it. And I'm wearing pink today, specifically in honor of our topic. But it just felt oppressive then. Once I got to the ages that you're talking about, I got totally into it. I mean, I wore my Sugar and Ice Revlon lipstick. I, was very boy crazy and whatever that entailed. But also
I don't think I've seen
what
Sugar,
is Sugar and Ice.
Is that a classic color?
Okay. Well, if people could please email us. If you are listening to this and you wore Sugar and Ice Revlon, please email us at, what are we, Gabby?
All the efforts pod at Gmail.
At gmail.com. So it was a frosted, like whitish, pinkish, and it's what you wore.
I'm looking at it now. I just Google image search. It doesn't look, I don't know, like it doesn't look like it's still, no, it does exist. You can still get it. And it's what I think of when I think of the frosty, I understand you were wearing it in the 60s.
It's sort of cheap looking. No, I'm definitely not wearing it.
No, in the 60s, but but it reminds me of lipstick colors that were big in the 80s. That sort of like, it looks like glittery icing kind of.
Yes, it was lovely. Right? It was delicious. It made us feel, I think I can speak for all young girls at that time. It made you feel, I guess feminine and sexy. Okay, let's jump back, way back. So every society has different notions of what is feminine and what is masculine and what are traits that are feminine and what are tasks that are feminine. But one thing that I learned is clear across the board is that women have inferior status in all societies. How much does that suck?
That sucks. Yeah.
It does. And yet things, I find it interesting when you also realize that so many cultures are matriarchal. So in the home, women run the show. Who is the voice of authority in the home? That's always mom, right?
Right.
Well, there is that wait till dad gets home kind of a thing. And again, we're talking about just your sort of standard heteronormative nuclear family. Mm-hmm. I think that we ascribe different traits to femininity, and mostly that is top down. That is society handing that to you. So things like, nurturing, sensitive, demure, sweet. These are words that often are associated with femininity. But femininity, of course, cannot be understood as a fixed set of essential traits. It isn't.
Right. Well,
it is. It's so much else. But the themes get reinforced, and they get reinforced through everything, through education, right from the beginning. There's a point in schooling, and I don't have data on this off the top of my head, but where girls are, always doing better and better in school, raising their hand, being more involved and interactive in the classroom. And then there is a point somewhere around puberty where that starts to shift, and girls start to maybe think they're not supposed to be so loud, or think they're not supposed to be so good. And boys start taking over in the classroom. It's an argument for why so many people choose to send their daughters to all-girls schools.
Yeah. I have a memory of being in 5th grade, kind of before that sort of realization about my own femininity that I was talking about before, but this was definitely a part of that time. I remember having this realization. I was in this group. It was I don't know if anyone's familiar with Odyssey of the Mind, but it was this like very nerdy, gifted and talented thing where it was a group of kids, and we worked on a project, and then we brought it to the big Odyssey of the Mind competition. And I don't even really remember what the project was, but I do remember that there were 4 girls in the group. I was one of them. The other one was sort of my childhood best friend, who she knew everything that she was doing. She knew what she was doing when it came to femininity. She was so beautiful, and I was so insanely jealous of the way that she was able to navigate that. And then 2 other girls who were kind of in that realm. And I remember noticing that to a certain extent, the girls would start, it was around the time when the girls would start being quiet when they had an idea. And I didn't have a sense of keeping my mouth shut when I had an idea. I didn't have any awareness that was something that wouldn't fly. I just had this sense that if I had something to say, I should say it. And then I remember it was around the time when, if what I said wasn't perfect, or if I took up too much space when I was talking, or, God forbid, I made a mistake, maybe it's because I was really sensitive, but I remember having this sense that the other girls seemed to just know that it's better to stay quiet. That there was this power of maybe it felt like power to me,
like knowing your place.
Yeah, it was like, but it seemed like these girls knew it. They understood, and I didn't understand how to navigate that. And I noticed it a lot, even as an adult, that there are women who have this sense, and it's now I feel more complicated about it because now I feel offended by the idea that I should know my place. But at the time, it was almost like this secret power that some girls knew and some girls didn't. And which now, as I'm speaking, just sounds like such a messed up way.
And yet, that secret power was used as a way to manipulate situations and manipulate boys who I remember thinking girls were smarter than boys when I was much younger, except for those couple of boys. I think maybe things are changing now, Gabby, where the sex role stereotypes aren't being foisted upon kids in the way that they had been. I'm thinking about, big things and small things. First of all, kids dress all alike, right? Everybody wears hoodies and sweats and jeans. That was very different when I was growing up. This weekend, I watched a scout meeting, and it's no longer Boy Scouts, it's Scouts. And there are girls and boys together doing the same things. So I think this notion that I found so oppressive of that there was a certain standard of what femininity had to be, I'm thinking, and I'm very hopeful that isn't as much of a thing for girls growing up today. What's your sense of that?
It's interesting. I spend a lot of time on TikTok. It's kind of my new social media preference. And it does seem like, even though I do see what I would call traditional femininity and traditional masculinity, it does seem like it's becoming cooler and cooler to play with those things. And it's also, at least in many parts of our country, it's also considered cool to not necessarily put yourself in the category of feminine or masculine. And it seems like it's cool to have a sense of the complexity of both of those things. So that's certainly what I observe. And it's been interesting raising a almost 4-year-old who definitely is into feminine things, but we never really made an intentional effort one way or the other to feminize her. I mean, I have noticed she gravitates toward pink and purple. I don't wear a lot of pink or purple, but it's not. Yeah,
but you know what? So did my sons when they were little. My sons gravitated toward pink when they were little too, and someone told them pink was for girls.
Oh.
I let them choose pink. They would wear pink. I think kids love pink.
Well,
until we ascribe meaning to the pink.
We have kind of an interesting gender thing in our house, which is, and it doesn't even feel exactly like a gender thing, but as you know, knowing my daughter, she doesn't like to be called a girl, but she also doesn't like to be called a kid. And at first we thought maybe this was a gender thing, but I think it's really about, so she wants to be an animal, and she decides what the animal is kind of on a daily basis. And she doesn't fully understand the concept of the way that, like, let's say a dog, for example, can be quote unquote a girl because of the gender and sex are different things, but we'll refer to a dog with a vagina as a girl. And that concept is sort of above, I think she could get it if she wanted to, but she's just not interested. She's just like, there are animals and that's what I am. I'm not a girl. I'm not a kid. I'm not a boy. I'm an animal. And that's what she's in right now. So I almost feel like in some ways that has, because she's not wanting to talk with us about what do girls do, we're not talking about anything explicitly. She's interested in makeup because very occasionally I would put on lipstick before the pandemic, and back when I still remembered how to do that. But it's interesting to see what happens without really putting too much effort one way or the other into shaping her.
Interesting. There's a TED Talk that both Gabby and I watched in preparation for this show that I highly recommend you watch, and we will link to it in the show notes. It's called We Need to Restore Femininity, and it's by Michelle Miller, author of the book, The Underwriting, and apparently it's so successful it's now going to be a television series. She was in finance and had always been a super high achiever, had gone to Stanford Business School, and had been just, one of the very smartest people in the early 2000s they're going into finance. And she went into finance and she was achieving at a very high level. And at some point she realized this was not for her. There was meaning lacking, and that what she really wanted to do was be a writer. But the idea of being a writer isn't necessarily a path to success, as you and I both know, right? It can be, and it might not be. And there's a lot of work that you put in before you ever see any return. And one of the things that she began to explore was really what is femininity and what is masculinity. And her take was that femininity was about experience and masculinity was about results and goals and having goals set up and achieving them. And that is really what reinforces masculinity, and that it isn't about all these other things like nurturing and sensitivity. Those come later, but that if you're experientially oriented, that's just really, those are the byproducts. What was your take from the TED Talk?
I was thinking about, it made me think, when she was talking about how she made all of these decisions that were results oriented, it made me think about how many things I have done that were inherently results oriented, or as she says, masculine, because that is the society that we live in. Because achieving results is what we value as a society. And it makes complete sense because we live in a patriarchal society where men are the ones determining things. And all the proof that you need, and all the proof in the world that you need for that is if you go into a corporate office and you check the thermostat, and then you look around and you see who's wearing an extra sweater or jacket at their desk, you'll find that it is generally, the thermostat is set, if it's a mostly male office, the thermostat is set lower. And it's not to save money. It's because men tend to run hotter and therefore like it cooler, and all the women wear jackets. And that is the greatest metaphor for how our society is run, because we set the temperature, so to speak, to accommodate masculinity if we're going to be really literal about it. And so I was thinking a lot about that while I was watching her talk. What did you think?
Well, I thought a lot about the whole women's liberation movement because I came of age, as we've said many times, during the 60s and 70s. And so there was a lot of fight for women to have better access to opportunity and equal pay and control over their bodies and having literally equal rights under the Constitution. Why the Equal Rights Amendment never passed is completely beyond me, but I digress. So I think what happened during that whole phase, and she certainly addresses this in her TED Talk, Michelle Miller, is that women picked up more of the masculinity, but men didn't pick up more of the femininity, and that our society has really suffered as a result. So when she says we need to restore femininity, she doesn't just mean for women. She means we need to restore it for people clear across the board. Because if you focus on quality of experience, what follows from that are the other kinds of traits like sensitivity, like creativity, nurturing, all those other things. What's interesting is that while that's all going on, and we are definitely in a time where people are experimenting with gender identity and I mean, you talk to someone in seventh grade. I have a very special person in my life who's in seventh grade, and she tells me what's going on in there. And now, granted, this is in Marin County, California, the bubble of which Gabby speaks. But at any given time, her classmates come in with a different gender identity on any given day and don't want to be pinned down, and have a different sexual identity on any given day. And she was telling me, well, and this friend is asexual. And I said, she's 12. Maybe she's pre-sexual. Maybe she just doesn't know yet. And maybe asexual is a way of saying, no, this is just too much pressure.
But you know what
right
I love?
now.
What I love when I think about how many personalities I tried on at that age, you know, like many, oh gosh, what was the book? I think it was a book called Girls, or there were
Judy Blume, maybe?
No. It was not Reviving Ophelia. Schoolgirls. It was Schoolgirls by. We'll link it in the show notes. I can't remember her name. I believe her last name starts with an O. She's a great psychologist who writes a lot about developing gender stuff and girls, and fantastic writer. Anyway, I remember reading this book, and it was all about how girls try on and discard personalities like so many pairs of Gerbaud jeans in a fitting room. And I'd never heard of Gerbaud jeans, so it always stayed in my mind. But I definitely tried on so many personalities and tried on so many identities. And I love that now that we are more open and accepting in many places, like in our Marin County bubble, of the trying on of the exchange of different selves and having that include our sexual or gendered components of our personalities. I love that kids can experiment with that. And also, my husband, who teaches high school, told me that all of the boys, masculine or otherwise, quote unquote, are wearing nail polish. Like, it's a thing. They're all wearing glittery, fun nail polish. And I think that is so cool.
Again, I think that's not everywhere. And I think that there are plenty of places in the country where if a high school male student wore glittery nail polish, sadly, he would be beaten up.
For sure.
But things going on in all different parts of the country. The other thing that I found very fascinating was femininity coaching. It is very big in England and getting bigger and bigger here in the United States as well. And I found one source of this where it's called the Femme Guide, FEMME Guide, a community of 40,000 ambitious and feminine women who create the lifestyle they want. So what happens? They actually have a University of Femininity, which right now is temporarily closed according to the website. So I'm not sure if that's a COVID thing or what the heck they were doing there. But in any case, they're temporarily closed. But it is a 12-week group coaching program made to show you how to refine your femininity and use it to get results in life. So right off the bat, what does that say to you? Refine your femininity and use it to get results.
Well,
are we going back to that power thing that you were talking about at age 12?
It's interesting. So I'm struck by the phrasing "refine your femininity." That seems. I think if I were, to me, the word I would have chosen is reclaim, reconnect with. But I'm curious what refining your femininity is, because it seems like that has a very specific idea of femininity in mind. It also reminds me of, have you ever heard of One Taste?
I have not.
Well, there's a great podcast all about One Taste, extremely interesting. I will find the name of it and we'll put it in our show notes. One Taste, I believe, I don't know if it still exists, but it was what some might allege, a cult. It was founded by this woman named Nicole Daedone. I think that's how you say her last name. And it was all about, it was about finding women reconnecting. I'm sure I'm butchering this, but I'm going to do my best. Women reconnecting with their internal femininity. And it was all via, this was like a huge thing a few years ago. They were based in San Francisco, but they had centers all over the country. And it was called the Orgasm Cult. And it was centered around another great F word, the female orgasm. And it was about women, along with the help of men, finding their femininity through a very particular branded kind of stroking. So they were all about it was all about reconnecting to femininity. So I guess we'll have to link to that podcast and listeners can find it for themselves, but it's super interesting.
I think it's a little different than what they were doing at the University of Femininity, which is she's trying to build highly confident, hyper feminine, witty, alluring, classy, beautiful, magnetic women.
Women
so
specifically?
Why those specifically? Yes, yes. This is for women. And the photos of women or they're photos, but they're really almost like cartoons on the website show people in these, what one would traditionally call hyper feminine type clothing with, tight waist, like a dress with a tight waist and then flaring out and hair that's long and curly or long and luscious in some fashion. I don't know. The whole thing sounds a little bit suspect to me because somewhere in here, it sounds manipulative. There's something about it as different than the thing you're talking about, where women are finding their own pleasure. That's a totally different thing. This is more like, how is it that I can present myself in the world in order to seduce men that I want to seduce, in order to climb the career ladder in ways it doesn't seem like it has to do with finding my power or building my powers of strategic analysis or something like that. It's not about that at all. It's more about how I present. And so maybe it's a backlash. Maybe all of this is, and we always have the pendulum swinging back and forth where, when gender becomes more fluid, people get threatened, people want to sort of hang on to what some traditional notion of femininity was and say, no, this is the way we need to be, girls need to be, this is how we manipulate our way to the top. Even the word seductive raised my antenna a little bit.
Right, because it's all about coyly shifting someone's attention in a direction rather than just explicitly stating what you want and, doing what you can to get it. It sounds like manipulation is required. And it reminds me of that line from My Big Fat Greek Wedding where the mother says to the main character, her daughter, when they're talking about something having to do with, I think it's getting the dad to accept her fiance. And the mother says, brilliant performance. I can't remember her name, but great actress. And she says, in every family, the man is the head, but the woman is the neck. And the neck can turn the head any way she wants. And while that's a clever turn of phrase and within a certain construct, that's a powerful way of looking at things. I also think that it's a little bit backwards. It's like girls succeed, girls and women and feminine identifying people have to slip into the cracks and crevices of society for opportunities, and that's not what we want. It's not an even playing field.
No. I mean, it's so funny. I think back to my childhood and how my mom wanted to throw a Sweet 16 party for me. And I was like, ugh. It just seemed so traditional and girly and role playing. And I said, no, I really want a stereo. So I got a stereo instead. I think that everyone needs to find their own inner feminine, male and female, and their own inner masculine, and whatever that is, and not feel like they have to try to fit themselves into a particular someone else's image of what feminine or masculine really is. But I really like this use of experience versus results. And I think if we think of femininity as being experience oriented, there's no way that anyone can feel pressured or oppressed by that.
Well, I also love, I love this idea. You can't run your life all experiential and you can't run your life all results. You really do need both, no matter what your, what gender you identify as, no matter what is between your legs. We need both to run our lives. We need both to make society function. So let's not oppress one side of things because they really do need to work together. We need synchronicity between experiential living and results-oriented living.
Thanks so much for listening to All the F Words today. She's Gabby Moskowitz, and I'm Joanne Green.
You can listen to us anywhere you get your podcasts and follow us on social media. We are on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube at All the F Words Pod. And email us, allthefwordspod@gmail.com.
Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye.